Welcome to Subject to Power. I'm El Kamihira. I'm going to give another heads up that we're going to talk about sex and sexual abuse in quite a lot of detail in this episode. So listen with care. If we imagine male sexuality as an insatiable creature, and sometimes it seems like that, it can appear like the world sure rushes to feed its every desire and cater to its every appetite. All forms of prostitution and pornography, online and in real life, offer an ever-expanding menu of sexual experiences, fetishes, and boundary-crossing pursuits. Technology is working overtime to invent new, fanciful, and novel ways to achieve male orgasm and indulge men in whatever it is that they might fancy next. And nowhere is this busy business of realizing men's sexual fantasies more obvious than in the sex doll business. My guest, Caitlin Roper, is an activist, writer, and campaigns manager at Collective Shout, a global grassroots campaigning movement against the objectification of women and sexualization of girls in media, advertising, and popular culture. Caitlin's writing has been featured in The Guardian, Huffington Post, and many other publications. And in 2022, she came out with her book, Sex Dolls, Robots, and Woman Hating. And that's a lot of what we'll be talking about today. In this hour, we'll be hearing about what Caitlin found when researching the whole world of sex dolls, the men who buy and use the sex dolls, and the many real-life impacts on women and girls and boys. I wanted to get a little sense of what brought you to this and maybe say a little bit of something about what Collective Shout is.
So Collective Shout is an Australian grassroots campaigning movement. We campaign against the objectification of women and the sexualization of girls in media, advertising, and popular culture. So as you can imagine, that's quite broad. We look at campaigns against pornography, prostitution, sex trafficking, just any form of commerce and sexual trade in women's bodies, porn culture and how the objectification of women is connected to men's violence against women, the many ways and the new ways that girls can be sexually exploited and in the digital sphere as well. So as campaigns manager, I run some of these campaigns. We're actually really quite collaborative. We work together as a team, but that's a little bit of what we do.
What was your path to this work?
Well, at the time I came across Collective Shout, I think they were less than a year old. They really just started to form. I was a young mum. I had 3 young kids. And like I guess a lot of mums do, you start to see the world through your children's eyes. And I was seeing a world where the objectification of women was so normalized. It was so routine and everyday. And this became alarming to me. I just thought, I'm seeing pornified and sexist advertising on billboards and in shopping centres, or, you go at the grocery store to the checkout to pay, and there's what they call lads mags, and there's really sexist, pornified images of women on the cover. Or another trend at this time was porn T-shirts, where men would wear these graphic T-shirts with images of women nude or in sort of really pornified poses, and just seeing all these little things together and thinking, this is the world that my kids are inhabiting, and these are the messages that they're getting about women, that women are first and foremost to be looked at, valued for their sexual appeal and sexual availability, that they're objects, they're things for someone else's use and pleasure. And this is, not at all what I wanted to teach my kids and the values I was trying to instill in them about women, and that, that women are human beings. So I've found myself feeling more and more angry and frustrated and powerless, feeling like I'm trying to sort of teach them one way and they're getting this onslaught of messages everywhere we turn. And that's when I discovered Collective Shout. And Collective Shout was actually challenging these kind of portrayals of women, these messages about women, this objectification of women and sexualization of girls. And they were getting results. They would call out sexist advertising and it would be removed, or they would, object to products or clothing that sexualized girls to retailers, for example, and these would be removed as well. So for me, this was this revelation that, we don't have to accept this is just the way things are. We can do things differently. We can speak out. And I can join many other like-minded people, many other women in calling this out and realize that I'm not alone. I'm not crazy, but this is wrong. This is harmful. And if we do speak out together, we can get results. So that was how I came to be a part of Collective Shout, and I've been there ever since.
It's amazing how effective your campaigns are. So kudos to doing that work. It's so necessary.
Absolutely.
You wrote a book called Sex Dolls, Robots, and Women Hating. What prompted you to write the book?
So I had been doing research in this space for several years. And I think the more I learned about this topic, the more I felt angry. This is a common thread through my work. Rage fuels my work. But I was just finding more and more about this topic. And I was thinking, people don't know this. They don't know what's going on. They don't know how bad it is. It needs to be exposed. People need to understand what is happening, the magnitude of this industry and the potential repercussions for women. Because something that I did find, and I was shocked, maybe I shouldn't have been shocked, maybe I should have just lowered my standards, but the research that I was coming across, there was a lot of more speculative content, things like considering the ethics of these products of sex dolls or sex robot technology. There was looking at the proposed uses for these products. And it became very clear very quickly that if there could be some sort of justification made for them by these male academics, and they would, and there were all these arguments they could be used for, well, they didn't say men, they said people.
Always.
But they could be for companionship, they could be for people who have social anxiety or who experience grief or loss, or people who live with disabilities, and just all these things that sex dolls and sex robots could be used for. And approaching this topic as though it's not a gendered issue. But what we know is that the vast majority of these products are female-bodied and buyers are overwhelmingly men. So this is a trade driven by male demand. It's premised on misogyny, male sexual entitlement, and the objectification of women. And we're seeing these academics just say, these would be really good for everyone. They'll be good for companionship. They'll solve all these problems. They'll help to alleviate loneliness, and that'll be great. And they'll improve health and well-being and improve intimate relationships. And I'm just thinking, on what planet are we arguing that men masturbating into sex dolls is going to be good for anyone other than the men masturbating into
not
sex
for them
dolls?
either, I want to add.
Exactly. It's not actually good for anyone, but all it is doing is prioritizing men's complete sexual freedom. So it was very much this kind of incel ideology.
An argument that you head off at the beginning of the book is that it is sold as a substitute partner, but it's actually an object.
And it's really interesting how these products are marketed because, as you say, they are objects. These are literal objects. So you cannot even have sex with them or have any kind of mutual relationship because it's a thing that you own. It's not a human being. There's no intimacy and no connection. But the way that they are marketed very deliberately as a replacement for women, or even superior to actual women, because they never get old, they never gain weight, they have no needs, no autonomy, and probably most importantly, they never say no. They're always available for endless, unlimited sexual use. And that definitely was a theme where these products are marketed as, unlimited, no limits, enact all your fantasies with no boundaries, no limits.
Mm-hmm.
And we're even seeing companies with names like Doll Wives or Silicon Wives. So they're marketed as this ideal girlfriend that you can use and pack away after.
And it's fascinating to listen to or to hear what men want to get rid of by using the dolls, being a responsive partner. They want to get rid of possible rejection. They enjoy not having conversation. They enjoy not having regard for a woman. They enjoy not having to participate in daily life. They enjoy not having affection. They enjoy not having an emotional connection or having to be attuned.
Well, it's a great question. It basically anything that requires, I think, giving anything of themselves in a relationship, it's a one-sided thing. They are getting something from it, but it's also taking something from them. There's no mutuality. There's no consideration of another person's needs or feelings or pleasure or pain. It's kind of this cold, soulless, empty thing. And while the consequences are way worse for women, I do think that this is a sad state of affairs for men because they're being so disconnected from their own humanity. They're just so caught up in their own pleasure that they can't actually see women as whole human beings, but just like a series of holes to be penetrated. So while they may think this works for me, I'm meeting this desire, it's still very empty. I regard sex dolls as a form of 3D pornography. So rather than just consuming and viewing like they do in pornography, it gives them the opportunity to sort of become pornographers themselves. A lot of the men in online forums, they produce pornographic content of their dolls. They're documenting what they're doing with their dolls with photos and videos. It's like an escalated way of engaging with pornography because, like I said, they're not viewing, now they're acting out in this physical, embodied, active experience where they're essentially practicing what they want to do to women on a replica woman. They like the no boundaries. They like being able to do whatever they want and not having to be told no. And also this, for some men, there was very much this appeal of the complete ownership and control over a woman. Now, it's obviously, it's not a woman, it's a replica woman, it's an object. But what I was seeing was that some men play out these really intense delusions where their doll is their romantic partner. So they dress them up, they photograph them, pose during like everyday activities, like as if they were washing the dishes or sitting at the table or working out, and plus all of the pornographic content too. And some of them, they even created personalities for their dolls. So they would have social media accounts as their doll. So it's obviously not the doll. The doll cannot run a social media account, but it's men putting on this fake personality of their doll. And in the sex doll forum, some of them would write with the persona of their doll. I remember one guy used to use pink font to indicate he was writing as his doll. And the things he would write, it's just like a porn addicted man, like his idea of what a woman would say. So it's that kind of content and things like porny fantasies of the doll is bisexual and wants to have encounters with other sex dolls on the forum and things like that. So it's this whole extreme level of investment and delusion and such a degree of ownership and colonization of a woman that it even means that I've got to take on the whole personality. It's not enough to have a doll and customize a doll to look the way I want. I'm going to customize this made up personality just to align with the porn inspired fantasies.
Right. And in the end, it's like the ideal is sexual partner is an object, a thing to be used.
It says a lot about how these men regard women because if they believe that a sex doll, like a literal object, is interchangeable with women, then it tells us a lot about how they see women as objects and as less than human. And they literally believe that a female-shaped piece of silicon, as long as it has penetrable orifices, can be a replacement for a woman. So in that sense, they're saying they see women as objects and as existing to provide sexual gratification.
I know they've been trying to market sex dolls to women, but is there a market for women? Do women buy sex dolls or sex robots?
Generally, no. I think for women, there's not a lot of appeal in having a sexual encounter with something that looks like a corpse. Like, it's not super appealing. But these dolls, like I said, they're overwhelmingly female bodied. They do have some made that are male bodied, but even the male bodied sex dolls, they're still, the market tends to be men, and they're put in the gay category because they know that the audience, the target market is still men. So there's no real evidence that this is something that women are particularly interested in. It's not something that I'm seeing in my research. So let's not pretend that this is something that is being driven by women or women's demand. It's always for men, in the interests of men. That's what's going on.
It makes me think and contemplate that women and men are just wired differently in this regard. We just don't work the same. I cannot imagine a woman getting sexually interested in an object that looks like a man, no matter how lifelike it might be.
And giving it a name and a personality and a backstory and having this whole delusional fantasy life together. Yeah.
You talk about that people who want to say that it's harmless say that, oh, it's just a sex toy. You know, women use sex toys, men use sex toys. But you make a real distinction between a sex toy and a sex doll.
Yeah, I've spent a long time contemplating this because, I mean, I use the term sex dolls because that's sort of the common term that's understood. But what's actually happening is masturbation. Like I said, dolls are objects. It's not a sentient partner, so you can't have sex with an inanimate object. So in that sense, dolls could be regarded as a sex toy, but it's a lot more complicated than that. And claims that dolls are just sex toys have been made by doll defenders, by misogynists, pedophile rights activists to justify what they're doing. You know, that these replica women and children produced for men's sexual use are just sex toys like any other. It's just masturbation. And on that basis, it would be inappropriate to have any laws against them. But here's where they're fundamentally different to standard sex toys. They are embodied in human form. I'm talking about the full body dolls and the female form typically. They're designed to look and feel like an actual woman, to emulate the realistic experience of sex with a woman or sexual abuse of a child, and one who is always sexually available. So essentially a female sex slave. And like I said, the way that these dolls are marketed, they're not marketed as sex toys or objects or something for masturbation. They're humanized. They're given names, personalities, sometimes even backstories, and they're marketed as the perfect girlfriend or the ideal woman. So I don't think you can just say that's the same as a sex toy.
The feedback loop, I feel that a man will have a sex doll in the shape of a woman, which is a thing. And then how does that shape his real life relationship with a woman who's not a thing?
I did actually include the accounts of some women in the book whose husbands and partners purchased a sex doll and what that was like for them. Basically, they felt like they were in constant competition with the doll. And not only that, but that they were losing, that they couldn't compete with this perfect pornified doll that was always ready and available. And in some cases, the husband actually did choose a doll over his wife and his family. So this idea, I think a lot of people say, oh, but you know, it's not a bad thing for men to have dolls. They could prevent them from harming women and prevent them from raping or sexually assaulting women and things like that. But the other thing about that is these men aren't typically just separate from women in the world. Like, we interact with these men in the world. Sometimes we're married to them. We going to work with them. We're just inhabiting the same space. This idea that women will somehow be protected if these men have access to these products and can be acting out their fantasies on them, that it's like an either or situation, when it's really not. It doesn't work like that.
I know many women who complain about porn's influence on their relationship. They feel like they can't be like what porn makes men expect or want. And I feel like because of porn, because of sex dolls, because of this kind of inundation of unrealistic women who, have gigantic plastic tits or a pornified body or even a silicone doll. It's affected women's self-concept, I feel like, in a broad way, that we are trying to look like sex dolls or we are trying to look like pornified women in order to satisfy this trend that's happening. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because it's like, on the one hand, dolls are becoming more and more realistic. I mean, they're still very much in line with those porn standards, but just they look more real. And then on the other hand, you have women sort of trying to look more and more like sex dolls. This is what, the influence of porn has done, where women feel like they have to conform to this pornified standard of beauty and appearance. And what we're trying to conform to is something that's not even real. It's being manufactured. So it's this whole,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm just going to quote something you say in the book. They function as obstacles that prevent humans from connecting with other humans. The sexual dynamic inherent in sex, all use with sex dolls, is not premised on connection or empathy. It's based on a view of sex as purely a physical experience, with women existing to facilitate it or dolls existing to facilitate it.
That's right. And one of the arguments that we hear so often is that these products could be the answer to loneliness. So there's a lot of people in the world who are lonely. Of course, we're not concerned with the women who are lonely. The answer here is geared towards the men who are lonely, because we're producing dolls with penetrable orifices for men's sexual use. But the point is that these products cannot actually alleviate loneliness, because there's no mutuality, no intimacy there. So all they can do is provide the means for on-demand sexual use. So this is not actually helping anything in terms of loneliness. And, what we could be saying is, let's talk about ways to form community, or to actually connect with human beings in the world and moving in a different direction. But what both pornography and sex dolls do is they actually get in the way of any kind of intimacy and real connection, genuine human relationships, because they keep the user alone. So in pornography, the user is masturbating in front of a screen. They're alone. There's no real connection there. With a sex doll, they're penetrating a doll, but there's no connection because, again, they're alone. They're masturbating into an object. So none of these things actually facilitate community or connection or anything that's going to help that problem where so many people are lonely. It's going to reinforce it, because it's going to be, like I said, a barrier, an obstacle to these people actually meeting other people and connecting and having real intimate experiences with anyone.
So true. And we have trended so far, traversed like so far as a culture into satisfying men's sexual urges in every way. It's like it's kind of the top priority in everything we do, whether it's legalizing and expanding prostitution, both online and in real life, as sex dolls and robots. And it's become a overwhelming movement in our culture to satisfy men's sex drive.
Yeah, this was a major theme that I came across while I was engaging with the research on this topic. And it was this notion of men's sexual deprivation. And the argument was made that essentially that if men aren't able to have sex whenever and however they want it, then they are experiencing sexual deprivation. So if men were married and they weren't having as much sex as they wanted with their wives, then it was pitched a sex doll could be the answer. If men wanted to engage in violent and abusive sexual practices, then again, sex doll could be the answer. And even if men wanted to engage in practicing child sexual abuse, then it was pitched that a child sex abuse doll could be the answer. So in all of these cases, rather than sort of considering, hey, maybe these are undesirable things, maybe we don't want to encourage this, maybe there's a limit, maybe men have to be told no sometimes. It's like, how can we make sure that whatever men want sexually is available to them? And if they can't have it because it's illegal or it's child abuse or rape or something like that, how can we find a way to facilitate it still? Which to me is just the wrong way of looking at this. But it was suggested by a number of male academics that if men aren't able to have sex on demand, essentially, then they're sexually deprived, and that this is a problem that needs to be solved. And I remember in the book quoting one academic who described this as, quote, sexual inequality. Now, when I hear the term sexual inequality, I'm thinking, are we talking about the oppression of women globally as a sex class, staggering levels of male violence against women globally, or anything like that? But here, what it was used to refer to was men's inability to access women's bodies for sex. And the conclusion for this was that not being able to have sex when and how they wanted was harmful, that it was harmful to their health and their well-being, and essentially a violation of their human rights. Now, this is pretty extreme. And again, the answer is pitched. They should all be able to access replica women. But as I argue in the book, men can only be deprived of sex if they're entitled to it. And this is really this incel kind of ideology that if men want sex or any kind of sex or sexual abuse that they want to perpetrate, we've got to find a way to accommodate it. And I'm like, why is this a priority? Why is this something that we're concerned with? Why am I not seeing in the literature concern for the implications for women and girls and how this might contribute to violence against them, how it reinforces rape culture, how the objectification of women is linked to a whole host of other forms of discrimination and oppression that women are facing. So it's really all about men's supposed sexual rights, very little consideration for women's basic human rights to be considered human beings.
How did we get here? I feel like at the same time as women as a class have made enormous gains in establishing our autonomy and space for action and ambition and et cetera, I just feel like this development happened at the same time in a strange way.
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's kind of like a direct backlash against women having more rights and more freedom than they have perhaps before. Some doll companies talk about producing these dolls in support of men who now have supposedly less rights or who are being treated poorly now because women are saying no. They're not sort of just stuck and available for sex on demand and all of those things. So I do think it very much is a backlash against the progress women have made over the last few decades. We're seeing a lot of men's rights activists loving this concept, this idea that it's almost like a threat to women, that if women step out of line, if they're not perfectly compliant and submissive, or if they don't want to have sex on demand, that they can be replaced. So the men are like, well, women, if you don't behave better and be more obedient, then I'm just going to get a sex doll.
In your research for this book, did you encounter women who actually felt threatened by this or upset by it?
Yeah, with the women whose husbands wanted to buy a sex doll, who had bought a sex doll, they could see what was going on. They could see, well, I am in competition with this doll and he does prefer the doll. So in that sense, that felt like a threat. But it also, I think, it was very distressing for these women, but deeply humiliating, because they're thinking, I'm not good enough. I'm the problem. I'm not attractive enough. Maybe I should be doing this or this. And if I was different, then I would be good enough. It's causing a lot of harm to women in many ways. And then the concept of these products being used as a tool of harassment or to humiliate and degrade women and just violating women in that sense. So we know that these dolls can be made in the likeness of women. This can happen without their knowledge or consent. It is standard practice from most doll manufacturers that buyers can customize dolls. They can select the body type and the skin tone and the hair and eye color and all of these details, right down to sort of freckles and fingernails and pubic hair and how they want that styled. So that's pretty standard. But some manufacturers also allow buyers to submit a photo of a woman. You might be their neighbor, might be someone they work with, or a girlfriend or an ex-girlfriend, and a doll can be made in her likeness. Or some of them make them very close. I remember one manufacturer sort of saying, to cover ourselves, we might change the blue eyes to green eyes. And then it's like, oh, it's not the same woman. So, but again, the intention is there. And I did include the stories of a few women in my book who learned about sex dolls made in their likeness and how distressing it was for them. There was one woman She found out about a sex doll modeled on her and given her name after the seller announced it was made in her likeness on a sex doll forum and linked to her Instagram account. So that's how she found it, because the men started coming to her account and getting in contact with her. And there were other accounts, a case where one man had claimed to have made a doll in the likeness of Greta Thunberg for the intention of sort of mocking and humiliating her, and the ways he would abuse the doll. And that the appeal of that was that it was to humiliate her, that she had not consented. I can demean and degrade you or your likeness in this way and share this and disseminate this with other men. You can see how these products can be used, can be customized, and how, again, this is another tool these men, predatory men, have at their disposal to exploit and humiliate women.
I mean, it's creepy on a whole new level, I have to say. It kind of like conjures up an image of like voodoo doll. It's very symbolic. And you were talking about, they can practice tying up women. They can practice immobilizing women. And they do that.
That's right. There were documented in sex doll forums. These are forums where men who own sex dolls congregate, and they'll often share photos and videos of their lives or of their dolls and different things that they're doing with their dolls, whether that's pornographic or sort of these day-to-day fantasies, or here's my doll making breakfast or whatever that is. But so they are documenting in these forums what they're doing. And some of these men quite explicitly describe using their dolls for training, for practice, because they intend to, have sexual relations with women and they want to practice on their dolls. Some of them refer to or document with photos BDSM, acts of sexual violence and torture, fantasies for preying on women, all kinds of, I've seen some pretty awful stuff in these forums. And like you said, the one man who did refer to how he would tie up his doll and how he would practice, because he wrote about doing it once and that didn't quite work. It wasn't quite tight enough. So I tried again, and how, he's got a female bodied object there to practice. And he's like, and now I figured out how to tie this rope in a way that renders the victim completely helpless. So they are actually practicing. But the other thing is, I think, there is definitely this common narrative around sex dolls and violence against women that, and not just from defenders of sex dolls and men's access to them, but also by well-meaning people, that it's better that these men use a doll or a robot than act out against a woman or child. So that it's preferable that these men just like vent their aggression on a doll or robot. And even, that sort of goes to the conclusion that sex dolls could prevent violence against women. But there's a few problems with this. First of all, it means, again, we're just accepting men's aggression and violence towards women and saying, we'll just find them an outlet, rather than challenging it and saying, hey, that's not okay. Do we want to encourage these behaviors and maintain it and get them to practice, or do we want them to actually stop? I mean, then there's also no evidence that access to sex dolls to be used for this could prevent violence, and the fact that it's much more likely it will encourage violence. Because first of all, we know that men do use, or they do regard these products as stand-ins for women, as replacement women, and they do to them what they want to do to women. So these dolls are replica women. They're also literal objects to be owned and used, primarily for sexual gratification. And we have decades of research on how sexual objectification harms women, how it's connected to men's violence against women. And final thought, I think for now, it also doesn't prevent violence, because it is violence. It's not simulated. It is real violence. Men are enacting it on silicone bodies that look and feel like women. And this is followed by an orgasm. So this argument that practicing violence on a replica woman or child and then being rewarded or reinforced by an orgasm, that this is somehow going to prevent violence rather than encouraging it, it doesn't make logical sense at all.
No, like it's just nonsensical on its face, I feel like. And especially the sort of more violent forms of BDSM trend with sex dolls. Now that's kind of dovetailing nicely into kink and kink culture, and you can't kink shame. And, women are told to be open-minded, you have to be a cool girl, not have hang-ups and not be a prude. And that sort of conditioning is happening a lot. And I feel like those things are connected as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, this is happening in many spaces and discussions about pornography and so-called kink and things like that. But it was also happening around sex dolls. So I saw a number of cases where women would be trying to draw attention to this issue and how it was affecting them in their personal lives. For example, when their husbands or partners had bought a sex doll or something like that, and they had to preface it with, "I'm not kink shaming, but." So it made it really difficult for women to say, "This makes me really uncomfortable. This violates my boundaries. This makes me feel distressed," or all the things that they're feeling and all their experiences, but they feel like they can't actually say what's going on because the greater crime, rather than, objectifying women and purchasing these dolls so they can act out all their sexual fantasies on a replica woman, it's worse to say maybe that's not okay, to critique any kind of sex act that is seen as worse and like more judgmental and shaming than the sex act that perpetuates violence against women or relies on women being regarded as things. So it's a form of silencing women and silencing any sort of political feminist critique or dissent. We have to ask who benefits from that when women are no longer allowed to say, "Actually, I don't think this is okay," or "This is harmful," or "This is against women's basic human rights." If women are not permitted to say that, then we have to consider, okay, who benefits from that?
That's right. And our space for objecting or our space for dictating what happens in sex just narrows because you're hit with criticism of being vanilla or too conservative or, God forbid, feminist.
And it's a form of grooming, I think. I mean, in my work with Collective Shout, we're very much in this space looking at the pornification of culture, how the messages from pornography, particularly that women are objects existing for male sexual use and should do so and look so like they should do it in a way that it's like it's appealing, like that this is something that women want as well. Women desire being degraded and abused. So these themes from pornography are now commonplace in mainstream popular culture. And it's so blatant at this point. We're seeing sexual choking, which is actually strangulation. That's the correct term for what's going on. That it's become so popularized in porn that, again, we're seeing it referenced in pop culture so much. We've documented this at Collective Shout. We've highlighted advertising, movies and TV shows, social media. We have kink talk genre on TikTok, popular songs, clothing, even baby clothes we found referencing sexual strangulation. This is all filtering down from pornography. And this is a potentially lethal form of male violence against women. Women are dying at the hands of men who do this. But you come back to this recurring theme that women desire and enjoy abuse and degradation. And you can look to 50 Shades of Grey or plenty of other things like that with that message. But just the way that it's presented as normal. So if girls don't enjoy violence and being degraded and abused, it's like there's something wrong with them and they're branded vanilla, sexually boring, and no one wants that. So it's this way that young women and girls are being groomed to tolerate sexual violence and degradation and to not even be able to name it and identify it when it's happening because it's just sex, isn't it? It's just normal. That's just what you do in sex. Men degrade you, they strangle you. So it's, again, another way that we're taking the language away from women. We're preventing women from being able to identify what is happening, to speak out about the ways that they're being abused and oppressed.
Right. And also, there is so little space, so little exploration happening in terms of what women actually want. That's not part of the conversation at all. It's just assumed that to play along with a sort of sexual degradation and being objectified is what you push against. But what is it that we actually want, sexually? That's not even a page in the book. We're not even asked the question. about what we might like or what works for women or what is good for women or what women want. It's all having to adjust and adjust and adjust to male sexuality. And it just makes me sad for women, honestly, like especially young women coming of age. I remember as a younger woman, like commuting on the subway in New York City and being so disturbed at the billboards and advertising with like naked women in sexual poses. And I wasn't even, not even remotely conservative, extremely liberal person, but like standing jam-packed with men all around you. And then these images of women who look like they were in sexual orgasm all around you, all day, every day. And I just remember feeling tired of it and exhausted from the constant barrage of these images on your eyeballs, your brain, your mind.
Yeah, well, this is the world that women inhabit every day, isn't it? Just this constant objectification. It's so normalized and unremarkable. But it does have an effect, and it does create a space where women feel unsafe or unwelcome, or it's hostile to women. And when you just have to be in that space all the time and be reminded that this is what you are for, this is how men see you, this is your greatest value, it's really hard to sort of come out of that with a healthy self-concept, I suppose.
The internet, obviously, and digital media in general has opened up so many new ways for men to transgress or channel their sexual fantasies. New boundaries are crossed kind of every day. And I feel like we don't talk about enough is that men work together. It is a coordinated effort by men all over the world to create places like OnlyFans or Pornhub or others, the concerted effort on the part of men to work together in networks to do this. Do you have any thoughts on that?
There was a great piece, I think, shared last year by Dr. M on how men bond over violence against women, how it's like these rituals almost. And when I wrote this book, I sort of spent a lot of time looking at all the different technological advances and the tools that men have at their disposal to exploit and terrorize and harass women. And a lot of it does take place in these group settings. So we're seeing things like, well, when men create or distribute image-based abuse, also known as revenge porn, these intimate images of women that they distribute with other men, it's often there are groups set up for this or forums where these men trade and share this kind of content. There's subreddits like Degrade Your Wife, where men post images of female partners or other women in their life and invite men to degrade them. What would you do to my wife or to this woman? And then, the way that they share footage of rape and sexual assault and non-consensually filmed content, and they upload it to porn sites so they can all sort of like enjoy it together. And God, everything, spy cams, upskirting, downblasting. There's forums dedicated to all of this. So yeah, it's definitely something that's going on. And particularly in the sex doll space, we have these online forums where men post pornographic images of their dolls for others to enjoy, sometimes BDSM and torture. And what happens is that users are encouraging each other and egging each other on, like, oh, you post more, do this. And I've even seen sorry, this is probably a bit depressing or upsetting, child sex abuse doll forums where these men share pornographic images and videos. So this is virtual child sexual abuse material, videos of them using the dolls, including infant dolls, and other users will make requests for sex abuse acts to be performed on the dolls. And these men, they discuss together how they get around laws criminalizing child sex abuse dolls, how not to get caught. So you're right, there is some kind of bonding element among these men where they are working together and kind of their loyalty is to each other and they're looking out for each other and how they can keep doing what they're doing, exploiting women, and again, with no regard for the women or children who they are harming.
I think if we're going to get to the heart of this issue, if we are to like actually effectively counter it, we really have to start talking about the coalitional nature of how men bond with each other. I almost think, as you're talking, it made me think that their intimacy is actually with other men. It's the sharing with other men.
I've read something similar to that, the sort of argument from a feminist theorist. It might be Mary Daly, it might be Sheila Jeffreys, I can't quite remember, but basically just that the real relationships are between men, not men and women. Like, yeah.
You veered into child sexual abuse dolls. I wanted to spend a little bit of time with that because men who are pedophiles or who have pedophilic tendencies or interests do work together. That's a known fact, both violating children and the sex abuse dolls. But I wanted to ask you, you distinguish between sex dolls who are replicas of women and child sexual abuse dolls. Can you maybe just describe a little bit what they are, what they look like, where they come from, and why you call them child sexual abuse dolls as opposed to child sex dolls?
Child sex abuse dolls are replica little girls and toddlers and babies, and they're all produced again for men's sexual use. Now, it is possible for these dolls to be male bodied, to be in the form of little boys. But over the years, I've seen hundreds of dolls modeled on little girls and about a handful on boys. So they are typically generally modeled on little girls. They have penetrable orifices designed to accommodate an adult male's penis. So they have a vagina, an anus, and a mouth, these orifices. And often in the advertising, the depth of these orifices is detailed. That information is included for buyers. There's also replica child body parts where you can get disembodied heads, legs, genitals, torsos for the same purpose. And what these dolls do is they allow predators to practice acts of child sexual abuse on replica children. I'll come back to the point that you made about why I call them child sexual abuse dolls or child sex abuse dolls. It's because I think a lot of the language in the media that would be reported as or described as child sex dolls, but that suggests that children can have sex or consent to sex when we know that any sex act involving a child is an act of sexual abuse. So that's why I'm quite deliberate around the language there, that it's not sex, but it is sexual abuse. So when these men purchase and use these dolls, they're doing it because they want to practice acts of child sexual abuse and child rape on replica children. That is what is going on. So these products, they're mainly produced in China and Japan. And you might be surprised how openly they can be sold. We've found them on a number of mainstream online retailers over the years, including Amazon, eBay, Wish, Alibaba, Etsy, Temu, and Shein. And at Collective Shout, we've run campaigns to successfully get these pulled from a number of those platforms. We've also found them on social media platforms like Instagram and Twitter, accounts that are just dedicated to child sex abuse dolls, to selling them, including images and videos of them being used. It's really quite surprising. You think they'd just be all sort of secret on the dark web or something, and it's quite in plain sight a lot of the time. It's bad enough that these dolls are being made of children, but it does get worse. They could be customized in the likeness of an actual child. So again, just like with regular sex dolls, it's pretty typical for dolls to be customized with the hair and eye color and those sort of things. But some manufacturers offer to customize dolls based on a photo of a child supplied by the buyer. So these dolls are used to create new virtual child sexual abuse material. Men film themselves using their dolls and share these to pedophile forums. And again, like I mentioned, users make requests for certain sex abuse acts that they want to see. So in Australia, child sex abuse dolls are illegal, and in a few other countries as well. We're trying to get a global campaign for uniform laws criminalizing these products going.
You write about men working with the manufacturers to get around this ban. I'm going to quote a manufacturer who says, owning a sex doll modeled on the body of a teen girl is nobody else's business, and nobody has the right to judge you. As a grown man, you have entitlement to your fetishes, and it's not like you're hurting anyone. And it just speaks to the justifications that are kind of ready-made and in place. But clearly, men are helping each other in a network sort of fashion to get around the ban.
It's all very self-serving. It's all, we're not hurting anyone. It's again just prioritizing men's complete sexual freedom over everything else. And whether that means harming children, harming women, nothing else comes close when it's men talking about their sexual supposed rights. Like the harms to anyone else, just irrelevant.
You also write about, and I think this is interesting in that people in general understand that child sexual abuse dolls are a bad thing, but they can't transfer that concern for women.
That's right. And that's been a significant source of frustration for me because, as you say, most people can get on board and say, oh, child sex abuse dolls, like sex dolls made in the likeness of children for men to practice on, like that's a bad thing. That's not a good thing. This is going to be harmful for children. So there is some recognition that having a doll made in the likeness of a child, that is not disconnected from children, that actually does harm children, but it doesn't transfer when it comes to women. And I'm not sure if that's just because the objectification of women is so everyday, so unremarkable, as I've said, that people are quite comfortable with women being objectified and regarded as things to be used for sex. And if that's why it makes it easier to justify, they don't sort of connect sex dolls modeled on adult women to harms to women. Like, hey, how is this contributing to the objectification of women? How is this contributing to men's violence against women? Does this fit in rape culture? So all these things that you think logical human beings could ask these questions, all of a sudden it's, oh, but it's adults, so it's fine. But then these are the same arguments applied to pornography. Now, obviously, no one is arguing that child sexual abuse material, that's anything other than violence and abuse. But I think it's this idea that once it involves adults, it's no longer abuse, it's consensual, it's consenting adults, and it's fine. But we do know that a lot of this content is inherently violent and degrading and abusive. It's not always consensual in the way that we would like to think consent should take place. But people just kind of go, oh, it's bad when it happens to children. Of course it is. But they're less willing to acknowledge abuse of women when it's happening to women.
Yeah. There's also another argument that says, well, it's better that they do it on dolls rather than real children. But you also say, using child sexual abuse dolls takes perpetrators from thoughts about it, fantasies about it, to behaviors. It is an actual action, and it won't prevent men from abusing actual children. I don't know why anyone would think that.
Yeah, well, because a lot of the defenders of child sex abuse dolls say it's just fantasy. You can't legislate against fantasy. Oh, you're trying to get inside people's heads and prevent them from thinking thoughts, as if it's just this thing that's happening in their head. I think I might have quoted Andrea Dworkin in the book, this idea that fantasy, it exists in your head. And once it takes place outside your head, it's not a fantasy anymore. It's an act in the world. So when these men, they're not just having fantasies or thoughts, their behaviors, they're purchasing an illegal child sex abuse doll and they're performing sex acts on it. And then maybe they are filming these sex abuse acts and distributing it so other people can participate. It's not just fantasy. It's not thoughts only. They are behaviors in the real world. And what we have seen as well, the vast majority of men found in possession of child sex abuse dolls are still sexually offending against children. They're typically found with child sexual abuse material. So these are images and videos of rape and sexual abuse and torture of children. So this is pretty standard. These men are found in possession of this content. And then there's other ways that these men are sexually offending against children. And I included some in the book, but I've come across more since then. There was a case in Australia where a Victorian man, a teacher, had printed out school photos of different children and he was using them like as masks. So he had a child sex abuse doll and he would use photos of his actual students in his child sex abuse doll use. And again, we know that these dolls can be customized in the likeness of actual children. So Again, it's not something that fits neatly into this either or. There's a lot of overlap and a lot of ways that these products are being used to facilitate the abuse of actual children. So, apart from the fact that they are sex dolls made in the likeness of children, which normalize and legitimize men's sexual use and abuse of children, that they could be used for grooming, that they can encourage these acts rather than discourage them. It's not a case of no harm to children, because children are being harmed by this.
Yeah. There is a debate whether to regulate or abolish. And I know you're working towards abolition, especially of the child sexual abuse dolls. Why abolition and not regulation?
Well, I don't think we can settle for anything less at this point. So some academics argue that regulation is the way to go, that the dolls could be slightly less sexist and slightly less pornified, that they could be designed with more diversity in body types, or that the robotic dolls could be programmed to just randomly refuse the user or to require enthusiastic consent. There's no way to make this extreme objectification and dehumanization of women ethical or feminist or not harmful. We're talking about replica women dolls that exist for men's on-demand, unlimited sexual use. You can't do that in a feminist way. It's not a thing that you can do. So the problem with these dolls isn't that they're not diverse enough or don't represent different body types. They're fundamentally and inherently misogynistic. And I think I say in the book, they are the embodiment of woman hating. They're premised on the notion that one half of the population exists for the sexual use and gratification of the other. And I think we need to keep bringing it back to the social context in which we live. We live in a patriarchy. This is a system of institutionalized male dominance. And that is the context in which men are producing and purchasing and using sex dolls modeled on women and girls for their sexual gratification. And it's not happening the other way around. This is very much a manifestation, an expression of woman hating. We're not seeing global trades in male-bodied dolls and male-bodied child sex abuse dolls that are driven by women. It's not what is going on. So we need to acknowledge this as a form of woman hating, as an expression of male supremacy and power. And it's no good to slightly improve the replica women made for men's on-demand sexual use. We need to abolish it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I have to say, like, it was hard reading your book, and I can't imagine doing the work of researching and kind of discovering all this.
Yeah, I was mad a lot. I did find it actually helpful in a way, because I think when I was just researching, I was very affected and quite angry at what I was reading, but there was nowhere for that to go. And it was once I was writing a book. Have you seen that GIF of Kermit the Frog angry type, like fast typing?
Yeah.
In my state as I wrote the book, because I think being able to expose what is happening, what is being done, the interest behind it, the male academics, the pedophile rights activists, the men's rights activists who are saying, oh, this is fine, this is good, this is, all about health and well-being, and this is how we should be promoting and encouraging this. So for me to be like, nope, I'm going to say what I'm coming across, and I'm going to expose what is happening and what I'm seeing, and feeling like that was one way I could challenge this industry and these products, I suppose, feeling like as difficult it was to research and to write and to sort of engage with some of the worst humanity has to offer, which is what I was doing when I was researching, feeling like I was able to turn that into a form of resistance and hopefully the means to educate other people on what's going on and maybe motivate them to take action as well. That I could do. That made it doable, I think.
It felt very liberating to read the book, and that, just being able to see, well, this is the truth of things. And so thank you for kind of opening a window on all of it. I have to say, when I first started the book, my mind went, well, if that's an outlet, so be it. At least it's not against real women. I was one of those, I kind of had like a preconception like that. And by the end of the book, it's so, so crystal clear that's not at all what it is. And it poses a real risk to women and children everywhere, really.
That's good to hear, because I suppose that was sort of my intention going in, that there might be people who are like, well, it's a bit weird and creepy, but maybe it serves a purpose, maybe it's better than the alternative. And I was thinking, these are the people who I think I can actually reach and say, hey, yeah, that's one way of looking at it, but here's what's going on and here's why I don't think that's happening. And to just help people to understand the inherent misogyny of it all.
Very much. Are you writing anything new? Are you researching anything new at the moment?
What I am looking at the moment is AI, and how, particularly in the space of child sexual abuse and child sexual abuse material, so how that is being used as a tool. Again, there's the component how that could be paired with dolls and robotic dolls. But so that, I think, is sort of the next frontier, just the ways that AI is being used to sexually exploit women and girls. We're talking about campaigns at Collective Shout against nudifying and undressing apps. These are apps where you can put in a photo of a woman or girl, and many of these apps only work on women and girls' bodies, and it virtually undresses her. It churns out a nude image, not just nude images. It can turn her into different genres of pornography. So like hentai or pregnant or slave, things like that. So, the whole deep fake sexual abuse. And a lot of these apps and these technologies, they're really accessible, they're cheap, they're fast, they're easy. And there was research, I think, from early last year that found in a 1-month period, these websites attracted like 24 million unique visitors. So this is not, again, just happening on the dark web. This is becoming more and more popular. And I just want to give a little disclaimer there, that terminology, my colleague Lynn Swanson-Kennedy has pointed out really well, that the term AI generated, it suggests that it was done by AI, but it's not done by AI. It's AI is being used as a tool by predatory men. So we don't want to sort of invisibilize the perpetrators. But yeah, I do have a particular interest in AI being used in the production of child sexual abuse material and the trends in that space. What we're seeing is AI can be trained on child sexual abuse material, or CSAM, and it can produce new fictional CSAM using the likeness of actual victims. So it's creating more abuse content of them and re-victimizing them. And we're also seeing that it can be used to conceal abuse, because the content can be altered to look like more cartoonish or more like a sketch, or where you can turn innocent, non-sexualized images and videos of children into pornography. So many, many more ways for predatory men to sexually exploit women and children. So that's something I'm looking at a bit more now, is that aspect, as that becomes a bigger part of our lives. And at Collective Shout, we're working on campaigns against some of these things.
It's chilling, and it obviously this reveals things about men that are very frightening. AI can be used for so many things. The internet can be used for so many things. Connection, community, sharing our lives. And it is, it is that too. But the level of sexual predation is bananas. I hope there are some action groups being put together to work on male sexuality, to research and find out where this is headed and where it's going and how can we remedy it.
Yeah, it's almost like we need to just go right back to the beginning, just sort of strip away all this stuff, and I don't know, and go back to basics. I don't know what that looks like, but I hope there's a way of coming back, that enough men and boys who are not, sociopathic, are kind of going, this, I don't like this. I don't want to be this. I don't want to participate in this. I want to do things differently. I want to have authentic, meaningful connections and relationships with the women in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be part of a predatory industry that's premised on human suffering. And that people, even, sometimes maybe it begins with their own self-interest. I don't want to not be able to perform sexually because I'm addicted or, engaged in compulsive porn use. But I'm hoping that more and more men are going to see this is harmful for them and for all the women in their lives, and start to reject pornography and these harmful messages from pornography.
I hope that happens. I really do. I hope that happens. But thank you. Thank you for talking with me. And it's a scary conversation, but a really, really enlightening one, too. Thank you for listening to Subject to Power. You can find the show online at subjecttopower.com or subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcasts. I'd love to know your thoughts on these conversations, so please drop a note on the website or find us on social media. The best way to support the show is to rate and review Subject to Power on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other listeners find us. Subject to Power is written, hosted, and produced by me, El Kamihira. Audio engineering is done by Jason Sheasley at Abridged Audio. Cover art by B. Johnson, and music by Beware of Darkness.